Welcome back, Source Nation. You're listening live to Mailbox Sundays with your hosts, Dr. Terry Jackson, Life Coach Tim T., and Pastor Kenny Smith.
Welcome back, Source Nation. This is your host, Dr. Terry Jackson, and you're listening to It's Your Time Personal Development. And again, TIME is an acronym for Transform, Inspire, Motivate, and Empower. And we have another empowering show for you this evening. We have with us a guest, entrepreneur, Mr. Michael English. And our topic for discussion this evening is the need for African Americans to develop entrepreneurial incubators. I wouldn't do Mr. English's background and his experience any justice if I began to speak about his background. So I'll let Mr. English do that. Hello, Michael. How are you this evening?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I definitely appreciate it.
Welcome. You're welcome. Give us a little bit about who you are, your experience in incubators, and why it's important for African Americans to get involved with this incubator movement.
Yeah, definitely. Originally from Virginia Beach, Virginia. Grew up there, went to school there, and then decided to actually move to North Carolina in 2008 for school. My idea of college, all throughout high school was leaving the state and never coming back. So decided to go to North Carolina Central. I went to Central from about 2008 to 2013, studied exercise sports science, right? So out of high school, that was kind of the safe choice, right? I figured I'd pick a city where medicine is pretty prominent, and then I wanted to go into exercise sports science because of my love for sports and playing sports throughout high school. So I graduated from college. I worked in a physical therapy clinic, privately owned physical therapy clinic, for about 2 years, and just really couldn't ignore the itch I had for entrepreneurship and innovation. So decided to walk away from that job after I went to a Hive Global Leaders Conference in San Francisco, and decided to leave the job, and I started to work for a local company called American Underground. American Underground is one of 9 Google for Entrepreneurs tech hubs in America. It houses, over 275 companies in about 4 different locations, and we're actually growing to a 5th location in a couple of weeks. So that's in a nutshell kind of, what I'm working on in addition to, working at American Underground. Also do some work with a local nonprofit called the Art of Cool Project, and their mission is to increase the audience for jazz music. And so my role specifically within the company is the program director for the Innovate Your Cool conference. And that is, basically a conference that we want to use to leverage popular culture to get more underrepresented minorities involved in technology and entrepreneurship. And, I think that kind of segues perfectly into the work that I do with and for my company, Rise Network. And the goal with Rise Network is to create a network of co-working spaces amongst HBCUs throughout the nation. Is to expose the students to this type of environment from an aesthetic standpoint, a workplace that's cool, that's creative, that they can come and network with like-minded individuals, but also create the network in the sense of allowing the students to connect with their peers who may also be working on businesses, give them access to other entrepreneurs who have done it before, to lend support and help, grow that community for students. So yeah, I mean, that the idea just really came from getting involved with American Underground at a very interesting transition point in my life, and then just becoming a part of that community and seeing how, once the space is right and entrepreneurs are around other entrepreneurs, the type of things that can happen. And I want to bring that type of environment and community to HBCUs.
Yeah. Let me ask this question because, of course, I'm a product of an HBCU. You and I attended both North Carolina Central University, of course, at different times. But as we read the media and we look, at tech companies, there seems to be somewhat of an absence of African Americans in the tech space. Is that real, or is that just a perceived, or is that an illusion that we are just not there? And what do we need to do to get there if we're not there?
Yeah, I think it's very real. I think from an availability of jobs standpoint, there isn't enough people involved in STEM-based education to fulfill the jobs, regardless of the race, right? Like, regardless if we were just talking about, African Americans, we were talking about Caucasians, if we were talking about any race of people, if everyone was involved, we still wouldn't fill the amount of jobs that are available, that will become available through, computer science and STEM-based education. But when you talk specifically about the presence of African Americans and minorities or Latins in this community, it's definitely a shortage. If I was to use American Underground as kind of a microcosm, there's a ton of companies, but there is still, a very strong push to get more minorities involved. And American Underground's, their main mission is to be the most diverse tech hub in America, and doing so with great programming to help pull in these communities, resources to help pull them in. But I definitely think there's a shortage. The answer, how do we get more people involved, I think it's something that, I think about constantly, right? I think at this point in the conversation, there was this urgency to get the main point out, and the main point is that, hey, we don't have enough representation at these companies that resemble the rest of the world, that it doesn't resemble the demographics of the world, the shifting demographics of the world. So I think that message is out loud and clear. I think, the people who need to hear about it in order to contribute know. I think where we are now is how do we reach the folks who aren't necessarily interested in computer science, and how do we show them that, hey, there's a role you can play within this whole diversity in tech conversation. It doesn't, coding doesn't necessarily have to be the end-all, be-all. So I think it's just a matter of, taking the message to these communities in a way that they can relate and see themselves contributing.
I think you just made an extremely valid and interesting point, that even though we have the tech companies, you don't necessarily have to be a coder to have an impact or to contribute, because what we tend to forget is, even though we have this technology, that technology is within an organization that still has to maintain an organizational structure as all other companies. And so we need to kind of take a look at it from, you still have marketing, you still have sales, you still have accounting. And so we need to take a look at it but when we hear tech, everybody thinks, well, I have to be a coder. In 2006, I read a book by Thomas Friedman called The World is Flat. And he talked about what you mentioned about STEM and how the U.S. will not have enough employees to go into the technical fields. And that's why less and less people were retiring from NASA, because we didn't have the scientists to fill those positions.
Right.
Being that you are in the incubator, What are you seeing from a skills development or a skills retooling from older workers who know that they need to shift from old skill sets to new skill sets in order to be employable? Is the underground, is there a strategy for that? How are they attacking that?
Yeah, I couldn't speak. So my role within the underground specifically is, and I think this speaks to the point about getting involved in this community without being a coder. But my role with the underground specifically is within the news division. So it's a company called ExitEvent.com, and we cover all of the entrepreneurship news in the state of North Carolina. And my role specifically is head of sales and events and business development. So with that role, it's no tech involved as far as, writing code for a website or an app, et cetera, but it's driving sales and awareness for this digital platform. So a very, very, important piece of the community, of the tech community, just a different way to look at the involvement. But specifically, I think, American Underground has been doing some great programming around working with Code 2040. Every year they have an entrepreneur in residence that kind of intercedes between the community at large and the American Underground community on programming to get more engagement within this underrepresented community.
One of the things that I read about quite often as it relates to tech companies, they always, at least there are charts out there that show the average age of workers within the tech industry for some of the top companies. And we know that a lot of people have been displaced because of organizational retooling. They're becoming leaner and meaner, and as a result, certain people who are caught maybe in the 40s, early 50s, they may not necessarily have those skill sets. Is this being addressed by courses offered within American Underground? And I know you're in the sales end. And the reason I ask that question is because when I look at those charts of the average age of people in the tech industry, when you start getting around 32, 33, 34, 35, you don't start to see as many. So there's some ageism that's happening there. What's being done what's being done in order to help those who are in the middle of the road and they want to retool so that they can become gainfully employed in the tech sector?
Yeah, I think specifically housed within American Underground. So the courses aren't necessarily, byproducts of American Underground, but what's in the Underground is a coding academy called the Iron Yard. Actually, they occupy a couple of American Underground campuses, one in Raleigh and one in downtown Durham at American Tobacco. But this is a coding school. I believe it's a 10-week program where applicants can apply and come in and learn, the basics of computer coding. And, there's a whole, placement process. They do a demo day of something that they've been building while they were in the program and pitch that kind of as their capstone. So that's one, institutional program that's been getting a lot of traction, not only from, the more mature audience and going back to school demographic, but also, some students coming out of high school or college age who just want to pick up a skill to make themselves more marketable as they, transition, whether it's through college, or, fresh out of high school and just looking for a trade to pick up.
Okay, yeah, that's excellent, because though I know those kinds of things are needed, there are people out there who are kind of in the middle. Let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk specifically about African Americans' involvement in incubators. I know you and I met at the Coopers event in Wilmington, North Carolina. We began to talk a little bit about tech. We found out we had a mutual friend. We found out we remembered the same fraternity, 06. So,
yes, sir. Yeah.
With that, as you've traveled and as you've written stories of going out to make sales, what's the involvement around, say, the state of North Carolina or across the country of African American businesses and incubators, and what's the value of those incubators?
Well, I think the value is exponential. Just seeing what American Underground has been able to do specifically is a testament to the need for entrepreneurs to be around other entrepreneurs. I think what makes the space special is it definitely looks cool, that draws you in, but it's the people in the space. It's the sharing of the ideas. It is the sharing of resources that really makes the community thrive the way it has. I think there are other co-working space incubators that are specifically catering to whether it's women as a minority group or African Americans as a minority group or veterans as potential minority group. That it's a common tie that bonds that group of people that is essential for community, right? Like at the base of all of this is community. And I think what would be, very valuable for the African American community is figuring out ways to build these incubators within the HBCU community, and then start to serve that community. Potentially begin to, spin out businesses from the college that can help support the college itself, but also the alumni that come out of it. But it's basically a need that I saw as a student at North Carolina Central, was that, I knew I was an entrepreneur. I knew I had this affinity for business because I started DJing as a sophomore, but didn't really have, the infrastructure from academia to, take a business idea from conception to launch. Or did I know that, I had peers who may have lived down the hall that were thinking the same thing as I was as far as starting a business in college or maybe after graduation. So I think these spaces can really kind of act as a hub for energy, for resources, for, collective building. Somebody may meet someone that could do some graphic design work, someone, and then, meet another person that could do some copywriting for them, in the same day. So I think it's important to try to aggregate these resources and more specifically the talent and build community based on that.
Now, tell me a little bit about the types of courses. Say I'm a client with a workspace in American Underground. What types of courses are available for me around the development, again, of infrastructure of my business on a regular basis, so that I can, after a certain amount of years, leave the underground and know that I have built a sustainable infrastructure that will allow me to scale my business? Yeah,
I think it's important to understand that American Underground isn't like an incubator, so to speak. So if I came to American Underground with a business idea, that's not necessarily what they're there for, right? So they're there to house the community. If you need space to work with your business, they're definitely there for that. And as far as connecting you to resources that could, help you develop a business plan or get you some financing or a loan, et cetera, they definitely have those connections to share. There are incubators that, have been housed in American Underground. One recently was the Startup Factory. I think they stopped recently. But though, and Groundworks Labs is another, specific incubator that helps, someone ideate and get their idea to market, but not necessarily what American Underground does.
Okay, understand. Thanks for that clarity. I definitely appreciate that, because it sounds like there is a need there for the types of incubator that can take you from the ideation piece to the launching piece while you're still there with support.
I think specifically to college age students, I think that's extremely important. I think there's models at other universities, like the apprenticeship program, the Adams Apprenticeship Program, I think it is, at UNC, where they take a group of students, interdisciplinary backgrounds as far as education, and they take them through, a class where they give them the tools to be entrepreneurial and build their companies. So I definitely think, within the collegiate setting, those types of classes and apprenticeships are extremely valuable.
And here's a question for you. You may or may not be familiar with, and if you are, please share with us. There's all kinds of technology out there, and people are talking about fintech right now. I hear a lot about fintech, financial technology, software products. In your time, you're working with American Underground as well as seeing other tech. How involved have you seen African Americans just in that whole financial tech arena?
I think again, it's probably a microcosm of the large problem, right? Is that it's not enough minority representation, period. So I think even within fintech, I think it's just a certain sector of technology which only filters it down a little bit more. But to that point, I have a friend, actually his name is Doug Spate, who I'm sure you may have met him or ran into him before, but he's the current entrepreneur in residence at American Underground through the Code 2040 program. And I believe his angle within his business is financial tech, like leveraging the leasing process of equipment, whether it's office equipment or industrial equipment. That's kind of a fintech play for his company. But to make the long story short, I think it could always be more.
Okay, yep. I would agree with you 100%. Now, if you had to paint the picture of a utopian environment for an incubator, what would that look like? For a start, let me back up and say startup incubator. What would that look like?
Yeah. So my belief is, so I'll start aesthetically. Aesthetically, I think it should definitely be appealing, right? I don't think it should be, something that people have to dread going to. They should want to spend their time there, feel more creative there, and many spaces have done a good job of kind of curating that environment. American Underground has definitely figured out how to make the space cool without sacrificing functionality. So I definitely think there's a certain an aesthetic element that plays a part to get people in. And specifically from my angle, if we're talking about college kids, it has to, be somewhat cool for them to want to buy into it. So I think that leads into the next piece is getting buy-in from the students will require, them being a part of the building process. So allow the students to, help give input on the type of programming that they want to see or the type of things that they're into, so that when programming decisions are made, they're made with the end user in mind, right? Like oftentimes what I would, just scratch my head about was, the lack of student interaction within the college system as far as programming. and you'd have department chairs making decisions for students who are well under their age, right? There's a generation gap as far as understanding what they want to learn about and how it should be packaged to them. So, and I think that's extremely important as far as increasing engagement, making sure that the programming speaks to what the students want to learn first, and then is packaged in a way that they want to engage with it. And I think the last piece for me would be exposure and building the networks. I think a lot of the reason why we don't see so much engagement is because the students or these underrepresented communities don't know that the opportunities exist. Right before, I was involved with American Underground and Exit Event. I didn't really know that this type of work was out here. Like, I didn't know, I can make an impact in the local tech industry by, doing advertisements and marketing for the local startup newspaper. So I think exposure is key, and then networks. I think we have to prepare this next generation of entrepreneurs and contributors to the tech industry to network and communicate, because all of the work is done in teams, and I think it's extremely important to network and know how to work and contribute to the team goal. So it probably would be a marriage of all of those points.
One of the most talked about issues around incubators, around accelerators, around innovation and technology is the topic of venture capital.
Mm-hmm.
That's extremely important to the growth and the success of tech companies. What has been your experience with taking a look at the venture capital process such that people can more successfully obtain venture capital to continue to build their businesses and their dreams?
I think it goes to my last point about exposure and networks. I think what I've seen, and I've never had to raise a round of funding ever for any business that I've started. So I think it's speaking from what I know from covering companies that have done it or having friends that have done it. It's all about getting the introduction, getting the time, right? So a lot of these venture capitalists, are getting thousands upon thousands of inbound requests for their money, and they're programmed to say no as fast as possible, just because it's out of those millions of proposals, only a few of them will work, and their job is to poke holes in it as fast as possible. But if you never get that introduction, to get that enough time for the VC or the angel investor to even take a look at what you're pitching, it's going to be pretty tough for you to raise money. So I think that initial part goes back to your network. Is who do you know that could make an introduction to that person? And 9 times out of 10 in these underrepresented communities, the VCs don't look like us. There are a few that are popping up that will be game changers, I believe, as far as seeing the statistics shift a little bit, hopefully, to see more VC funding being invested in minority-led companies. But I think the network is a major piece of it. It's who you know.
Let's shift back to HBCUs real quick, because we both have vested interest in HBCUs, and we want to see them continue to thrive, especially with being what it is. if you had to rate HBCUs today from 1 to 10, with 10 being the best and 1 being the worst, and of course 5 being the middle of the road, where would you rate HBCUs as it relates to being fully engaged and fully understanding this whole tech movement?
That's a tough one. I'm gonna go middle of the road at 5, and
okay.
I say that because I see a lot of good things are happening. One thing specifically, recently, Mark Zuckerberg visited North Carolina A&T a couple of weeks ago, and that's the CEO, founder of Facebook. Went to North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, North Carolina, to just talk to the students, and that was big. I think that's huge for the community and the movement to get more attention on tech jobs. Him coming to the campus, people may not be fully aware of what this whole recruitment within tech or diversity in tech movement is, but they know Facebook. And so he was able to, tie the two conversations together. So it's good things like that happening. Howard just announced a partnership with Google that will, build more connectivity between the university and that company as far as training more minority engineers. So there are great things like that happening. Even locally, Shaw University just opened up on-campus resource center for entrepreneurs. So I see a lot of those good things happening. But then there's also, I think we're just playing catch-up, essentially, at this point as far as HBCUs go. We're getting aware of the topics and the opportunities, but other colleges, to compare them, they're kind of 5 to 10 years ahead of HBCUs, which isn't anything new. But we're just playing catch up in that respect as far as entrepreneurship and developing curriculum and community and opportunities for our students specifically. And then, my prayer, I think, specifically within HBCUs, is that they could potentially use some of the companies that come out of the space, whether it's an incubator, to help fuel the sustainability of the university. Because every year, just as much good stuff as we hear about partnerships within tech, on the other side, from a financial side, there's always the threat of an HBCU being closed down because of, mismanaged funds or accreditation, et cetera. So my hope, on kind of choosing the middle of the ground is that, I don't want to ignore all of the great strides that are being made within this space, but there are other things that, have plagued HBCUs for a while that I'm hoping, that maybe a refocus on building entrepreneurship within the campus, within the students, can kind of help deter for a little while.
Okay, great. Yeah, I remember reading the article about Zuckerberg in Greensboro at A&T. And, of course, A&T has had a very strong engineering program for many, 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 many years. They've turned out several astronauts. It was just interesting that he was there, given that of his employees, I think Facebook only has roughly about 1% African American within its workforce, and so that was very interesting that he felt. Go ahead. Go right.
Yeah, I think it's to your point. I think it's one. I think it's good on his part, right? Like, to potentially walk into, I wouldn't say, criticism for going, even though he only has 1% employment rate of African Americans or less, whatever the number is. But, it was, at the end of the day, the goal is to get more people involved. And I think it's good on Facebook's part and it's good on his part to say, all right, I could send my VP of whatever to go talk, but I want to go firsthand, right? Like let me own any. Let me take the blame here, right? Like I'll be the one to speak and say, hey, this is something we haven't done well with initially, but I wanted to come firsthand to say this is something that we want to take seriously going forward. I think that spoke a little deeper, to that point.
That could have very well been his agenda with that. At least let me hope that is his agenda, because it's always been difficult for me to understand only 1% of African Americans as a part of his workforce, when he didn't necessarily have to go to an HBCU. He could have gone to Cornell. He could have gone to Yale. He could have gone to Ursula Tech. He could have gone to many of these other top tech schools and chosen African Americans and still had a better percentage of African Americans in his workforce. So it's not that we are not in those schools, because we are, and it's not that we're not majoring in those types of fields because we are. It's just that, we keep talking diversity and we keep leaving out inclusion. And we have to understand that inclusion is not our issue, that's someone else's issue, because we've always been a part of the equation. We just hadn't been included in the equation, and those others have made decisions not to include us. But, moving forward, from a development perspective, what type of courses would you like to see in a startup incubator, so that people can get the right infrastructure to grow their businesses?
Yeah, I think ideal programming is really based on what the community would need, essentially. And to that point, you don't want to come in and try to shove coding down their throat if they're not interested in it. So I think there are just bare minimum classes that can be taught that can give people a toolkit, so to speak, to be more innovative and think a little more lean in solving problems and being creative and leveraging tech in that manner. So courses on marketing, whether it's a hard skill like digital marketing, AdWords, a lot of these courses that we're starting to see now on like Coursera or some of the other online platforms to just kind of get a certificate that a lot of these companies need, whether it's copywriting, skills-based training that can be used, whether you are using it for your own company or you're going into a company and helping them with a very specific skill set.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with you. I think I mentioned earlier, fundamentals of a business are the fundamentals of a business, regardless of what type of business that it is. And so, when you talk about digital marketing, it's the same thing, just a different platform. In order to reach your potential clients, potential customers. So, I would agree with you wholeheartedly on that. If you had to leave the listening audience with 3 key points of advice around entrepreneurial incubators and suggestions you would make, what would those 3 key pieces be?
I would say always build programming with the end user in mind. Don't rely on what they want. I think they'll be more than vocal in telling you what they need. So always build programming with your end user in mind. How do they want to receive it? Will they engage with it? Will they feel and take ownership in it? Will they, carry it on beyond the 4 walls of whatever space you're creating? I think number 2 is really just focus on community. I think it's important to build a community that shares the flow of resources and information. I think that is extremely important on so many different levels, right? In a lot of situations, there's a wealth of information, talent, and resources kind of locked into 1 or 2 segments of a certain community. So I think when you build community, it helps with the sharing of information and resources. And I think last but not least, I think if you can leverage community input, the community outside of the walls of the community you're trying to build within the incubator, I think that's extremely essential to the success of it. One thing that's made, American Underground great is the buy-in from the Raleigh-Durham area. Whether it's through the local government and creating programs for companies to be incubated, or companies that are just starting up in that area to get, certain government contracts and bids. I think tying in the local, municipalities to help kind of foster this community is extremely important. That would probably be the three there.
If someone were interested in having Mr. Michael English come and talk with them about entrepreneurship, about incubators, whether they're accelerators, how could someone reach you?
Yeah, via email, gm.michael.english@gmail.com, or just drop me a line at 757-319-6254. I'm always down to, just talk about ideas around entrepreneurship and co-working spaces, especially within the HBCU space. That's what I like to nerd out about at times. But I think one point I want to add on to the three is just allow the space to be authentic. If you're building a space and building a community, I think it'll start to kind of take on a shape of its own. So, allow the people in the community to kind of help foster that identity of the space.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Mr. English Frat, I thank you so very much for being a guest tonight. I think this is an extremely important topic for lots of reasons. And I think that, there probably has to be more extended conversations around what it takes to build a successful business in this innovative technological age. We're running out of time. If there's one more piece you'd like to give us that maybe you didn't think of earlier, I know you added the fourth. What would it be, or inspiring quote that fits well with you that you would like to share?
One thing I tell my friends, and I'm only 26, and I tell them all the time is, being in the room is half the battle, right? Like, you have to at least be in the room to be able to make an impact, and that's the thing, is that a lot of people, whether they may be interested in entrepreneurship or a business, starting their own business, what have you, they tend to isolate themselves. And what I've seen over the past couple of years working with this company and other companies is that great things don't happen in a bubble. So you have to, at least get in the room, be willing to interact with people, share your idea, because if that's the gift or the business that you feel God has kind of blessed you with giving birth to, you have to trust that, if you share that idea with other people, it'll happen for you, in the way that it was supposed to happen for you. So at least be in the room and be willing to share your idea, and keep build your network.
Great. That is a great piece of advice, and I'm sure that the listeners would take that to heart and hopefully implement that in what they do. Thank you so very much for being a guest again on the show, and I look forward to you and I collaborating a lot more on a lot of other projects.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Source Nation, I'd like to thank you for a wonderful 2+ years. This is the last night on Source Nation, or the last show on Source Nation for me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned a great deal, not only about myself, but about others. I see the world in a totally different way. I'm grateful to Tracy Jeffcoat as well as Kathy Dye for allowing me this platform. Thank you so much. Have a great one. See you soon, Source Nation. Good night.
Source Nation. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're listening live to Mailbox Sundays with Dr. Terry Jackson, Life Coach Tim T, and Pastor Kenny Smith.